All right, so how many have heard of TMUX or heard us talking about TMUX over the last little while? So TMUX stands for Terminal Multiplexer. When I was talking to the UI guys or the design team, whether or not they wanted to come to this meeting, and I explained it to them, they said, it sounds like it means too much UX. So, and that's probably fair given the nature of the content. But TMUX is basically a terminal, environment to make it easy to kind of do general tasks. I mean, things that you're going to do, you're going to get inside your editor, you're going to run command line utilities to compile your code, maybe have an auto test runner in the background. You'll start up like as you saw with Jake's previous presentation where he had a watcher. Those are the types of things that you're going to do pretty frequently. So with TMUX, they have the concept of sessions, windows, and panes, and that's the crux of like what TMUX is. Can anybody take a guess at what a session is? Go ahead.
Your active editor.
Your active editor?
Well, just like I don't want to say pane, but the current terminal you're in.
The stuff you've done from when you started TMUX.
That's pretty close. So if you remember the three things I said, sessions, windows, and panes, what do you think sessions has in it?
A collection of windows.
And a window has, there you go. That's about all it does. A session has a collection of windows, and windows have a collection of panes. You can have multiple sessions running concurrently, and they aren't persistent. That's a key thing to remember, is that if you were to restart your computer, those sessions are no longer running. You can detach from a session, and you can attach to, kind of jump between sessions. So to start this off, let's just kind of demonstrate. One thing you'll see here, that I have this TMUX, I can just do no arguments, and that's going to start up a new TMUX session. And you can see down here on the bottom left, the 0 and the number 1. The 0 is the name of the session, and then the number 1 is the current window.
So is the session sort of like a desktop? You could have multiple desktops.
You could think of it that way. That's a fair way to think of it. Another thing to note, you can rename sessions. So if I were to come and, if I remember the shortcut, oh, that's rename window. I don't want to do that. Go. I'll rename this from 0 to demo. So kind of makes it contextual. So if you want to jump between sessions, it makes it a little more user-friendly than just going by index, because that's not always so easy. But let's go ahead and take a look at that. Kind of gives you a little bit of information about what's going on. It's kind of long, so there's also a shortcut. Very familiar with the file system with ls. I already showed rename session. We can also do a multiple sessions. So let's actually disconnect. And I'm not actually in a TMUX session anymore. So if I come back in here, you'll still see that there's a session running, but I'm not attached to it. Real quick, I can reattach by saying TMUX attach, and then I am in the TMUX session. I can also detach and then come back and go TMUX. Demo 2, and now if I say TMUX ls, you can see that I have 2 sessions running. Pretty impressive, right? So, did I have a question?
I said it is for terminal.
I mean, it definitely makes using it nice. So, I can also kill sessions. So if I have something that's running that I don't need anymore, I can say oops. Yeah. did get killed. It also kicked me out of it when I killed it, but that's fine. Nothing too terribly complicated. The one thing that you probably didn't notice is that I was doing a lot of keyboard shortcuts, and I could also do it, longhand, where I can say new session with a command, and but I think a lot of us that are using Vim, it's really nice to kind of get as close to a Vim-like key binding as possible, and I'll start to demonstrate that as we go forward a little bit. One thing I want to start out with is let's go and add another window. So we're going to do it the long way first. So I did this by doing Control A. That's what I'm calling a leader key. Some people call it the prefix, whatever you want. I'm using Vim terminology because that's what is close to me. And then I do a colon to go into like the command mode. And then I'm going to say new window. And then you see down below I've got essentially 2 tabs with different things. So if I want to just say go into the dot files, now I'm giving contextual changes. Now, by default, these types of changes are not, they're not going to rename your window for you automatically. That is something that I have configured in my TMUX config. But there's also shortcuts. I don't have to do it the longhand version. I can go back in with my leader key and then just press C, and I can create another window with that as well. So Control A, or leader, with comma will rename the current window. So I can change this if I want. But something you'll probably laugh at is it's going to change it again anyway because of the way I have my file set up. So navigating between tabs, by default you can navigate between tabs, like cycle through them by leader key and then using O. But again, for that Vim-like navigation, you're typically using H, J, K, L. So I have it set up to where when I go in, I still have to do the leader, and then I do H, Control L, and I can cycle. So one other thing to mention, typically you always have to go into TMUX mode with your leader. You'll do your Control A, that puts you into TMUX mode, and then you'll say Control H, and then you'll get your command in. So when you're trying to like jump between tabs, that's kind of annoying, especially if you've got like, let's say 8 tabs open. And so you can make those bindings repeatable with just a -R in your TMUX config. So I can go into my command mode and then just say Command H and just cycle through them. Does that make sense? Okay. So then the last thing is that we have the concept of panes. Again, you can have multiple panes per window. Let's start out by taking a guess at what this is going to do. Those of you who haven't used TMUX yet, can everybody see that okay? Split window -H. What's it going to do?
Split horizontally.
Well, but what's horizontally? Where are you going to see a new pane?
The bottom.
The bottom? Does anybody agree? Disagree? Should we see?
That's not horizontal.
The line is horizontal.
I think that's the general opinion that everybody shares, is that doesn't feel natural, even though that's TMUX's terminology. So what might be something intuitive that you could do if you were trying to say, like, I want a vertical pane, I want a horizontal pane? Just
I want the pane to show up horizontally beside the current one.
well, here's what I thought was intuitive. So with my leader key, and then I do the vertical pipe.
Oh, so you made your own.
Yeah, you just bind something that feels more natural.
Because I used to think of it like
Yeah.
in between percent.
Yeah, there are shorthand versions of it, but still, even with percent, it's not. Like, what does percent mean when you're splitting the window?
Percent is funny. The double quotes is the other guy.
And then, yeah, so I did hyphen for this. So now that you've seen this this pane, what's the next thing you're going to want to do? Resizing it. So I want this pane to be bigger to the left, right? So let's see what that looks like. That wasn't what I was trying to go for. Okay, so now let's jump over to the other one that I was actually trying to make smaller. Okay, now we're getting a little bit more. So I do again. Okay, now we're getting closer. That's kind of annoying though, right? Does anybody feel like that's something they'd want to have to type all the time? So what might we do different?
Control
So I kind of like doing it with the same kind of Vim style navigation. So I into it and then I say shift. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, and you can make that configurable. I think 5 is small enough increment, but big enough to not have to do it 20 times every time you want to change it. So what are some other things we want to do with panes? Let's say it's also common that like you kind of jump between panes a lot sometimes. Another thing you can do is I can say Control A and semicolon, and that will always take me back to the previous pane that I was in before. I don't know once you get those Vim navigation down. I don't, because I actually have it now to where all I have to do is say Control L. That's a lot less than saying Control A and semicolon, and so it's do anything. So that's kind of nice. But what's another thing that you're typically doing inside of? First, I'm going to say let's kill this pane. So we don't need that. Now we've got, this is what I would think is a typical, screen adjustment. You're going to have something like your Vim editor in here. You're going to have something like a watch mode over here, test running here. So let's go ahead and okay, so what are the challenges that you can think of? Like, how many are familiar with what you typically use to navigate in Vim for jumping between panes? Because let's show an example. I've got nerd tree here. How do I navigate in Vim between these panes?
Control W. I use Control K.
Yeah, I think everybody's different, but I think tendency, leans people towards the HJKL kind of navigation. So if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do Control L to jump into this pane. So what if I want to try and jump with the same? Oh, there it goes. So I'm using the same key bindings. Now there is a little bit of setup that you had to do. There is a plugin for Vim that is aware of TMUX running under the covers that kind of sends and forwards commands the right way. But that does make it so it's not like, I think what we were doing initially when we started using TMUX is you'd use Alt, and then inside Vim you'd use Control, and you can kind of do those pinky finger gymnastics, and it's not always nice. This kind of has a real nice workflow. So, any questions? Yeah, so that's a good question. He said, what about Zoom? So oftentimes I have this real estate, but as you can see, even on the projector and in this room, I don't have the same experience that I do with my dual monitors, so I might want to take up more space for Vim while I'm in it. So it would be nice if I could just kind of zoom in temporarily, and then when I'm done, I can just zoom back out. And that's just a simple Control-A, Z, and that's the toggle. So if I come back over here, and let's just say, not too bad, right?
Do you also have to control that to something else, or is it still control?
So I do actually have my caps lock mapped to my control function. That just seems a little easier to do. I do miss the caps lock occasionally when I'm writing SQL, but not the end of the world. I'm sure I can come up with something for that.
Hold your pinky on the shift key.
So,
Pretty easy.
so let's say I want to kill this pane here. So what's another thing you typically tend to do or want to do in a terminal when you've seen some output in a log file that you're kind of tracking? Yeah, okay. Clear's something that's just standard. That's nothing that's going to be special.
You don't want to scroll up.
Scroll up maybe. What about just you see an error?
Copy paste.
Sort of hot.
Copy paste.
Copy paste, yeah. Or maybe I want to go find the error. So something you'll see here. This was also like a custom configuration. There are different modes. TMUX actually has a VI mode for this type of thing, but you can also customize some of the other functions to be more Vim-like. So, for example, I can go Control-A and hit Escape, and then you see that little thing on the upper right. And now I can say question mark, and I say search up. So there's your Vim behavior. I can say slash to search forward, which is the same behavior you're going to see in Vim. So let's say I want to look for, okay. So what's the next thing I'm typically going to do? I'm going to probably copy something. So I can go V for your visual selection mode, Word, W, and then I can say yank. So then this is the only awkward thing. So when you want to paste, you'd think, because you're like VI focused, that you're going to hit P, and then it's going to paste. No, that's not going to happen, because if I hit P, that's what you get. So you go to leader, and then P. So yeah, that's pretty nice. It's nice to be able to do that. So this is basically like the crux of your typical stuff that you're getting in TMUX. What are some other things that you might, want to do? I'm not going to go into a lot of details. They call it pane surgery, but a lot of times, you might want to like take the current pane, move it off to its own window. Because let's say I started some command line utility that I want to run in the background. And after it's been running for a few minutes, I say, oh, it's not really providing me any like useful value, and it's taking up real estate. So you can basically move the current pane off into a new window. That's one example. Or I can take another window and move it into a new pane in the current window. Those types of things. I don't even really want to go into those details, because I think on your typical workflow, that's not really what you're getting into all that often. I think this gets you like 95% of what you're going to use. But another interesting thing that you can do is you can actually do pair programming in the same terminal session. So I can literally be in TMUX. Bob could be connected to the same TMUX session and be driving from his own computer connected through an SSH server, which is interesting. So,
is there separate cursors, or is it just take over cursor?
Both, actually. So you can have two people in the same session in different windows.
But if you're in the same window, how does it determine who's driving?
And you're both going to be driving. It's going to be awkward if you're both in the same window trying to like.
Somebody can be writing testing and give you implementation file.
Yeah, you could. If I had enough time, which I didn't really have enough time, because it is fairly involved to set it up, because you got to set up like your SSH keys and stuff like that in order to get it. But I was actually going to have Bob drive this whole presentation and kind of turn around, you know, and mesmerize the whole crowd by my, you know, blind typing skills.
So another simple thing you have mentioned is being able to load up a session with a preset set of windows and panes. You haven't mentioned that.
Okay, so that's a good question. As I said earlier, the sessions aren't persistent, but it is a very common task to need to come in and like get into a project with a configuration that you're always, you know, jumping to the same thing. There's a bunch of projects that make that easier. I use one called TMUXifier, although lately I haven't been using it just because I don't find that it's all that difficult to set up your 3 panes. Yeah, it's too quick for me to. I haven't had to do it so many times that it justifies me setting it up. Because the sessions are running in the background, so even if I close, actually here's a good example. If I close iTerm, quit it completely, then I'm right back to where I was. So I don't really restart my computer all that often, and I just kind of leave these things running in the background. So I don't find myself needing to go and set up those projects a lot. They are there, and like I said, I like TMUXifier specifically because it uses bash script files and uses TMUX terminology to set up your windows and your layouts. And you know, there's also a send keys function that can take a window and a pane argument, so that you can actually send it like Vim and a directory, and it will open Vim for you automatically. But like I said, I just haven't needed to. The other ones kind of tend to take a project-centric focus, and they also use YAML, and I don't really like that. So just for me. Go ahead.
Something else that I found myself doing once or twice was I'll have 1 or 2 things open and then I'll need to open another one. And then the layout, I'm like, well, I don't like these vertical, you know, I want them to be horizontal now. But the third one off to the side or something. So being able to switch the layout.
Yeah, there is actually, that's a good point. If I say Control A space, actually let me get a couple things here. Okay, so now if I say Control A space, it's cycling through a standard defined set of layouts. So
User defined or already?
This is already defined. And like I said, TMUXifier can use those predefined layouts to just set it up for you, you know, initially with those basic.
Isn't there also another command that like rotates the pane? So if you find a layout you like, then you can actually like rotate them around to get them in position. Can't remember.
That's a good question that you should respond back to the I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. That's not something I've actually needed. I tend to just kind of go left is Vim, right is my auto watch and auto test. So that's kind of the way I work, but everybody's different.
So one thing I do that might freak out a little bit is you can get the window resizing to use the mouse as well.
Yeah, you can. In fact, you know, you can configure it to allow selection. And I don't know if you guys can see that in the group, but can you see the visual difference of the selected pane?
Yeah.
You can make that more prominent. On my screens, it works just fine. You can actually make it a solid, you know, background rather than that dashed line. But it's nice to know which pane the cursor's in, because I don't know, sometimes you've been there and just like, I can't tell.
Have you ever found that you actually needed multiple sessions?
Not in practice. I would say it's probably not uncommon to say like a session per project. So like, as you know, I was working on the Gunyan Go stuff. I might have a Gunyon session, I might have a Gunyon sample session, and just switch between them. Or I might have a Scala related session. It doesn't really matter. But basically, if you have it set up for your project, rather than going through and changing the current session and then having to jump back to the way you had it before, it's probably better to create a new session and just set it up the way you need it.
The main reason they created sessions was for remote connections to other machines, so they could remote into like 5 different machines and have 5 set. Each machine would have its own session.
That is a good point, actually. They make a comment of that. This kind of in the same vein of the remote pairing. You can remote into 5 terminals on remote servers at the same time and issue commands to all of them at the same time.
So it logically looks like one pane that's going to 5 servers, or does it look like 5 panes?
You can issue commands to multiple, right.
Is this platform specific? Like, I haven't tried it on his VM, but
That's a good question. Windows is not supported. It does work with Linux and it works with Mac, but surprise, surprise.
Is TMUX already on our boxes, or do you have?
Brew install, yeah, and then if you're on Linux, it's apt-get. That's about all it takes.
What does a TMUX config look like?
So that's another good question. There's 2 aspects to look at a TMUX config. So you can do this question mark, and that will show you your bindings. So if there's some, what did I set that up as again? There's always this available to you when you say leader and then question mark.
How would you know, Chris?
You can
What if
search
you forgot your leader?
If I forgot, then I can come into my dot files and then say, so we can kind of cover some of these. I'm setting the default prefix to Control A because that's more natural than the default, which was Control B. A little closer together. This was something that we set up for our original kind of awkward navigation stuff, and then unbinding the, oh no, sorry. Binding is Control A, unbinding the default. Also setting up the default command to use ZSH instead of just your default terminal bash. Base index of 1, if you see the Windows on the tab down at the bottom, that's kind of your, rather than a 0-based index, it flows more naturally with the organization of the keyboard. Because another thing you can do, and I didn't mention this, is if I can do leader and just hit 2, then that jumps to the window. So I can go to a specific window just by pressing the number. Turning on mouse selection, making copy paste work with a whole lot of effort. Your default colors. For those of us that are using Vim in the terminal rather than using MacVim in the UI, specifically because we want to kind of keep focus in a single environment. 256 colors had to be configured inside of TMUX, otherwise it looks pretty wonky when you're using a solarized theme. You see these VI copies. These are all the things that I was mentioning earlier. That -R is the magic one to make the commands repeatable. I mean, nothing too difficult. And then those of you who are curious and want to start learning it, we do have the book on the Kindles that I used as a basis to set up my environment. So you're welcome to read through that. I thought it was going to take a lot longer, just like I thought the presentation would take a lot longer, but there's really not much to it. So
does that -R use that? So you do your leader key, and then you can do any other.
It makes your actual bound key. So in this case, Control H, repeatable. So I don't have to go back into the leader again. I can just keep hitting Control H, Control H, Control H, and then that's what makes that.
Does that mean you can also do? Because I noticed when you were resizing, you were going back and forth. So were you going like, H, L, whatever it is?
Yeah, I can jump back and forth between those. I stay in that mode for 500 milliseconds, and then if I pause for 500 milliseconds, then it goes back out of that mode. Does that make sense?
So can you do other commands with 500 milliseconds besides the navigation?
Yep,
Without the leader?
you can. Any other questions? All right, thanks for coming.